Hey, how you doing today? This Cam and Otis show, we're going to talk about the off season and how we can move things forward even when it's not the off season. And one thing I just want to throw out on this, uh, there's an analogy out there of your business being seasonal, and so I think talking about the off season might be an interesting approach and looking at that of how our businesses can be seasonal.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great launching point for us. And, your businesses can be seasonal. You can think about it in two different ways, ups and downs that your business may have throughout the year on a calendar cycle. Or, for a lot of businesses like in agriculture, that's a very common thing. Or then you can also have your ups and downs throughout the day, literally, of if you're working or if you're not working. That's something as I was going through this, preparing for this episode, I was thinking about how, really in a business, your off season to some extent, and even when you're playing a sport, is the time off from that activity. And if you're working towards your goals, then that's when you can really achieve that success.
That's true. There's so many businesses, if you think about it, that have a off season. Air quote the off season on that. You think about it, retail.
Mm-hmm.
What's game on for retail? Well, generally around Christmas time, right? That's when people are buying presents. And what does that mean? Well, off season is probably like February or
Mm-hmm.
March time frame, when it's just not a whole lot going on. It's kind of a dead time.
Exactly. And you have to be able to keep your team motivated during that time. And that's how you're going to have greater success in the long run. So the first thing I want to talk about with this is about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So it's all about just being a leader and motivating your teams in different ways, right? That's a lot of what we talk about. So extrinsic motivation is when you're engaging in a behavior or action, not because you enjoy the task itself, but because you want to get something else out of it. This can be gaining a reward or avoiding a punishment. So this is when you're showing up to practice, you're working hard at practice so coach doesn't yell at you. You're not showing up and working hard because you want to be there and working hard for your teammates. That's a difference.
So
Yes, sir.
let's back it up just a second. So extrinsic means external value, external things, able to push things out, give things away, or receive things from the outside, right? That's extrinsic. And intrinsic means it's internal, meaning you have it inside of you as an individual, or you're requiring things pushed into you. Because we actually, when I worked at Special Operations Command Europe, we divided, and at the time we had Europe and Africa as part of our responsibility. We had 96 countries. And we divided those 96 countries into intrinsic and extrinsic countries.
Okay.
And extrinsic meaning, think developed countries. So like Germany, Poland, Hungary, you name it, right? And the whole idea with the extrinsic countries was to get them to support what we were doing. So use their forces in places where we wanted to develop countries, use their, not just their forces, but their capabilities. And then you had intrinsic countries.
The assets.
The assets, yeah. Intrinsic countries like Sudan, South Sudan, the newest country in the world, South Sudan, intrinsic country. So it requires support from it's taking it in. And that was how we quite literally divided our map up, if you will, of responsibility. So I don't know if that helps define extrinsic and intrinsic a little bit further.
I think it really does, because that, kind of, we're looking at it in the case of motivation, but that really defines it in a broader sense of what you're looking at, in an extrinsic or intrinsic way. So going back to the motivational side of this, it's all about what's getting you to accomplish that task. If you're finding it personally rewarding, then that's that intrinsic motivation. And so when you are coaching, whether you're coaching rugby or you have a business, if you can inspire intrinsic motivation in your team, then you'll get greater benefits out of it in the long run. I think I want to start with sports on this one, just because I think it's the easiest example, because I don't know, it's just so simple to me that if you have your players, let's say rugby, for example, if you have players passing the ball, working on their skills in their off time and their off season even, and you also have them running in their spare time, lifting weights, all those type of things, you are going to get much better performance on the pitch. That's just a fact. And you can take that across into any other sport, whether it's skill, whether it's physical endurance, whether it's strength, whatever they're working for. You and John used to call them our wobos, whatever you need to work on. You go and you do your wobos in any spare time you have so that you can always be getting better. And when you're thinking that way, that's your intrinsic motivation to get you getting better. You want to be the best you can possibly be. And that's what keeps you going. And so if you can get your players inspired in that, you can get them bought in on that vision of being the best, whether it's the best player or the best team, or the best passer, whatever you want to define it as. That is really where you can get that motivation from.
I'm trying to remember how I used to put it. I'll have to count it out as we do it rather than saying, hey, there's 3 things, because I can't remember how many there are. But I used to always say, and we've talked about this before too, and I talked about it with your sister, who was a very good soccer player in her day, is you have talent. You have to have talent, number one. You have to have the drive to refine that talent, number 2, and then you have to have luck. I think that was it. I think those were the 3 things that we used to talk about. And we've known people that have the talent and have the drive but have no luck because they keep getting injured and have career-ending injuries. We had some good friends whose careers were ended like that. And then we've known people that had luck and they had a lot of talent, but they didn't have the drive.
Right.
It's that intrinsic thing like you're talking about is what is it that's going to make me or you, whoever it is, get up in the morning and the first thing I want to do is juggle a soccer ball, is study game film, is analyze what the opposition is going to do this weekend so that I can be better prepared for it. So that's what makes the difference. And when you talk about the next level of the game, that's where you win or lose, because the talent is even. And it reminds me of something else, particularly when we talk about business, is nobody can work harder than you, right? I mean, if you have that attitude of nobody can work harder than me, that's intrinsic.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And once you get that intrinsic motivation, that'll keep you going. And I kind of wanted to go back to your 3 examples there, because that motivation you were talking about, that's really, if you can inspire that in the players, you get that greater benefit because it drives it in anything else. You think about the players that you've coached, and I know you've talked to a lot of your former players and that are getting into business and all these different things. You see, and I know we've talked about this before, you see that the players who weren't necessarily the most talented, but were the most hardworking at the pitch or off the field even, especially, those players are the ones who are doing better, just to put it really generically, in life, I would say. Now, not to call anyone out or anything like that, because lots of people are doing very well. We had a lot of great guys on the teams back then. But many of the guys who are doing a lot of good work that you wouldn't necessarily have seen, even in rugby or not in rugby, it's the guys who had that intrinsic motivation to keep themselves going no matter what was happening.
Yeah. It's that ability, well, really, I think it goes back to it's an early on learned thing. So the kid who has to work extra hard to get a starting position on the team is somebody who's going to work hard for the rest of their lives, right?
Right.
Kid who shows up and is just a natural. I mean, I've seen plenty of those that are natural athletes that don't put in the extra effort and still do well at one level, but that next level, particularly getting out into the real world of life, is they don't succeed as well. They'll still be successful. Don't get me wrong. I mean, anybody that's put in some work is still going to be successful, but there's a difference.
And I'd like to jump off that if I can right here, because it's all, then you can look at whether it's looking at yourself or looking at your team, how can you tell if they're intrinsically or extrinsically motivated? And so I had a few examples I had typed out. So I'll start with the rugby one since we're on that subject. Because back when I was playing for you, our entire team was motivated. I think we could say that. But a lot of them were extrinsically motivated. A lot of them were intrinsically motivated. Did you enjoy playing rugby because you liked rugby, or did you enjoy winning? Do you enjoy your job? Do you go to work every morning because you love what you do, or do you go to work because you like getting paid? Did you clean your room because you like having a tidy living space, or did you clean your room because your mom's on her way home from work and she's going to fuss at you if she comes home and you haven't cleaned your room? It's all these type of things of why are you really doing what you're looking at? Is it extrinsic or is it intrinsic?
We know on that last one, it never worked for you, did it?
No, that was definitely an extrinsic one for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's a great point. And, on your team in your business, you really want your team to be intrinsically motivated. And one of the reasons you want them to be intrinsically motivated is not because it saves you a nickel as the business owner. It's because they will truly work hard and look for solutions and problem solve on their own, as opposed to you having to say, okay, here's the next step I need you to do. Please accomplish steps 3 and 4 after you finish step 2. When somebody's intrinsically motivated, they get up and they work and they enjoy working, and they're looking to solve the problem, not solve the solution. They're looking to create a solution to solve the problem, because that's what they want to do. They're part of the team. And one of the things that I've helped some companies with in the past is figuring out how to do that. And it's easy to say and it's really hard to do. And it really boils down to buy-in of core values, mission, and vision of your organization. And those things develop your intrinsic values for your team.
Right. It's all about having like a team culture built around your vision or built around your product, whatever that is. And if you build that team culture around it, get everyone bought into that team culture, then you'll have them intrinsically motivated.
Right. And that, you go back to the rugby club, and, what we did, part of our culture was we worked extra hard. We practiced more than any other team in the league. And we put in a lot of extra effort. So that was part of our culture, was working hard. And then the other part was, and we all adopted to it, and this is why we were successful all those years, was the fundamentals. We focused on the basics and the fundamentals, and everybody agreed on that and understood that we didn't have to do fancy things. We just had to do simple things really, really well.
Right. And I know this will be too specific of a rugby example for a lot of people that listen to it, but I just had to comment, watching the All Blacks in South Africa play last week. The All Blacks are, of course, as anyone who plays rugby knows, they're so freaking good, and it's amazing to watch them play. But 95% of the time when they score their amazing tries or they make these beautiful plays, it's nothing fancy. And that's it's still baffling. It's such a baffling thing to watch, is they just do the simple things so perfectly that they can win every single time. And when you're able to do that, when you focus on the little things, even in business, you're focusing on the little things, you're doing all the little things right, that'll set you up for success on a larger scale.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's foundational things that make you successful. And it's not going out and trying to do something fancy and wazoo. It's the foundations of who you are and what you do that create the foundation. I mean, to be circular defining again, I'm getting pretty good at that apparently. But it is creating that so that you can have that solid base to build up and go forward.
So I had one question for you to see if you can get this one right. I'm sure you will. So which is a better form of motivation, extrinsic or intrinsic?
It's intrinsic. Come on.
Because you always get to keep going with it, right?
Right. I mean, I already said that, right? What do I want on my team? I can offer bonus incentives. A lot of companies, particularly in the sales industry, offer commissions, and
Mhm.
you make your numbers. This quarter you get an extra bonus, and da 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 da. And you know what? Those people are motivated by the paycheck and
Right.
an extrinsic value. Now, there's always the exception to the rule, right? So there's some people that are motivated and just getting the paychecks an extra thing. But generally speaking, in that sort of business, that line of effort of sales, that commission based is extrinsically driven, and they're
Right.
going to go to the next. They'll hop over to the next company that offers them a better commission.
I'd like to point out that even though it was a stupid question we've already talked about, it got a good answer out of you. So my next bit, I had another question I had written down for you. It was, as we're looking at, off seasons, I was wondering if you could tie this directly into any of your experience in the Army rather than just the extrinsic and intrinsic countries that you were talking about earlier. But it seems to me that there would be a pretty good parallel with, you could even say, deployments versus training.
Yeah, I get, yeah, I guess so. As I think about it, there really is a off season, because so we go on a deployment for however long. Uh, you come back, and that's your off season, right? So you go through some recovery, just like you would at the end of a football season. The players go through some recovery. They have downtime, and then you shift gears. So now you've recovered, you've taken some time off, separate from whatever it was you were doing, and now you start to prepare for the next mission. So you go into the preseason training, if you will, and start moving forward in that aspect.
And would you say that it's important to have the same type of intrinsic motivation for the overarching goals during that off season, or because you're kind of resetting on a mission clock, if you will, that doesn't carry over as much?
I think it depends on the position of the person, the soldier, Marine. Uh, it really depends on their position, but generally speaking, the idea that the military has is, when you go on leave, when you take vacation, is you separate. So you separate from the mission to recover and rejuvenate and get your mind reset. And then you come back under optimal theory, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You come back ready to go, hit the ground running. I mean, it's really, kind of follows a pattern, if you will, of old school NFL, where the players at, after the last game, whether it was a Super Bowl or the last regular season game, depending on the team, they cleaned out their locker and they went home.
Right.
And they didn't do anything else. Well, nowadays, with the level of athletes, you train. If you want to be successful, you train all year long. You train in the off season. You don't just sit around and eat cheeseburgers all day. You're on a healthy diet and continuing to train. You may not train. I'm sure they don't train the same as they would in preseason, because you're in periodization. Now we understand that too. But you're still in the game. So in the military,
I wanted to, if I can jump in right there, I think that's an important note that, when we're talking about putting in this effort because you're intrinsically motivated or, working, it's not just like, to take your NFL example right there. It's not just going to the gym. You are working by whether, it's just passing the ball around, that's a bad example for a lot of positions in football, but, working on other aspects of it, getting your mind right and all those type of things, knowing what you're going into. We talk about it a lot in rugby, your mental, oh wow, I'm blanking on the word right here. Not mental health, mental
fitness.
mental fitness. You're able to go out, and your mental toughness. There we go. Wow. Sorry about that. mental toughness. You're able to you're able to go out, you have the mental toughness to go through and push yourself through that wall of pain, that pain barrier, whatever it is, and keep yourself going. I think that's, if you're able to have that mental toughness, you can keep yourself moving like that. And so that's an important aspect of it then is, if it's your off season, if the thing you need to do to perform tomorrow at work, some guys need to go out and relax. Some guys need to go on a run. With the hockey podcast I listen to, they talk a lot about different guys in the league, how most of the guys playing in the NHL now are the type where they want to go home and watch game film 24/7. They're the Sidney Crosbys of the world, and that the old style player is kind of dying out, but they were the guys who wanted to go out, and the way that they got themselves good to go in the morning was to go out and have a couple beers with the guys after each practice. And that's the thing that kept them going and kept them working every day. If they needed to go out and unwind in that way. So my point there is it's important to recognize what you need as a person in that setting moving forward with that to work towards your goal there.
You just reminded me of something, and since you brought up the All Blacks and the Springboks,
Mm-hmm.
If you watch the game and you saw at the beginning of the second half, they went to the sheds, if you will, and that's Southern Hemisphere terminology for the locker room. And they had a little bit of film, probably 30 seconds a minute of each shed. And I thought it was really interesting that and it was editing, so I'll caveat it with that. But what I thought was really interesting is when they showed the All Blacks, the entire team was standing with their arms around each other in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And Bowden Barrett, the very talented young man that plays fly half number 10, or in that case that day he was playing fullback number 15, was talking to the team. Now, you didn't, unless you could read lips, you didn't know what he was saying. You'd have to read Kiwi lips too. So with that funny accent, I don't know how easy that is.
A little bit trickier.
Yeah. But, he was talking to the team. And then they switched over and they showed the Springboks. And here's all the players, and they're kind of sitting on the floor and on chairs and stuff like that in the locker room. And the coach, and I can't remember his name, the head coach for the Boks, has his laptop in one hand, and he's pointing at his laptop and he's lecturing to the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was a really interesting. Like I said, it could have just been because I think that was a Kiwi feed, so they're showing the All Blacks and this great team camaraderie, and they're showing the Boks and they're getting yelled at by the coach. Which, although they did show the difference between Steve Hansen and the Springboks coach is like night and day in the coach's booths. It's really kind of funny. But that shows going forward with the team, and I thought it was really interesting. It'd been a great lesson if the All Blacks had won. Then you could say, look at that. Well, it was a tie game, so it doesn't matter. It means that, I guess, either way. But what it means is your culture, the leader is the coach, and sets that culture for who and how things need to change and how the team is motivated. And I thought that was really interesting. It'd be really interesting to have a personal survey of some kind of those 46 players, not the coaches, just the players, and see what their motivation was, and do the shrink test and see which team was predominantly intrinsic and which team was predominantly extrinsic.
Right. Maybe when I go back to school and get more into my behavioral economics, I can write a couple papers on that. See if I can talk to maybe, you got to run an experiment, have some coaches give different types of speeches than other coaches, get the players in there. But you're really making me think, as we're talking about extrinsic and intrinsic motivators, an interesting way to think about this. And it's not to say that coaches aren't a part of the team, but I think for a lot of players, this will make a lot of sense, and it works well in business too. That if you're getting inspired by the guys next to you, and it's the inspiration to, an example like rugby, literally going out and protecting them, making sure they don't get hurt and those type of things sometimes, going out and putting your body on the line for them, versus, you doing it because you know that Coach Otis is going to yell at you. Those are your intrinsic and your extrinsic. Yes, he's still a part of the team, but that's the punishment you're fearing, or it's the reward that you're learning, or that you're going after. And whereas if you're doing it for your teammates, there's still some extrinsic factors there. Of course, it's not yourself, but generally speaking, that means you bought into the vision of what you're doing as a team. And the same type of thing can go in business. Ideally, you don't have too much of a hierarchical disconnect in your business, just like you don't want it in any sort of team. But if you have people who are motivated by the fact that you're going to come in, if they're working really hard in the morning when you walk through the office versus not working hard the rest of the day, that means they're extrinsically motivated. If you have them bought into where it doesn't matter what you're doing, they're going to be working no matter what, you have an intrinsically motivated team.
Well, and going back to the military, it's not the national purpose. It's not the mission in the end. I mean, when the bullets start flying and you're in the foxhole, you're doing it because the guy to your left and your right. You're not doing it because of this higher purpose. When it comes down to that moment in time, and when it's life or death, it becomes, okay, it's about the guy to my left and right, and what can I do to save him, help him, make him successful, which in the end makes us all successful.
Right. And, that's something that you could instill in ways, I had a rugby example already, but you can instill that way in business as well. If you get, that team culture where you're bought in, we're a family here. We're not just coworkers, we're a family. That's where you kind of start getting that buy-in from, where you're doing it for each other rather than just that end goal. Going back to the rugby example, I know you would come in, you would fuss at us and say, down and go, you're doing this for each other. You take care of each other. You're not going out. A pregame isn't about having, going out and making the coach happy because you can, play great rugby. That's part of it. A bigger piece of it is going to be the fact that you want to go out and you want to work as hard as you can for the guy next to you.
Yeah. And it goes back to how do I make the guy next to me successful, right? And that's where you start to develop that intrinsic motivation. And it reminds me of it doesn't remind me because now I can't think of his name. Yogi, the Yogi Berra sort of era of baseball and talking about baseball and life. And it's the chemistry of the team. You hear people talk about the chemistry of the team and not necessarily the talent. So if you have a team full of the talented players, the most talent on the team, but they don't work well together, then they can't perform as a team. They perform as individuals.
Right. I think a good example of that, I think we talked about this before, the Matt Duchene interview. He mentioned that he didn't want to be the big guy because the big guy never wins a championship. And, you see that perfect example of a team who actually, well, not the perfect example because they didn't win the championship this year. The Blues had a whole other thing going. But for the Bruins, that front line, the second best line in hockey, like we Avalanche fans like to call them, the second best line in hockey is comprised of a bunch of guys who make $8 million a year, who could easily be making 13, 14 on every other team in the league. But the fact is, they're all bought in on that team culture. They're intrinsically motivated enough that they want to go in and work hard for each other. They don't care about the pay because they want to go out, they want to go out championship for each other. That's what it's all about.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think so. It's just, that's what it takes in the end is that ability to work together, and create flow, and I can talk about that. That's a whole nother subject area.
Well, as we touch on it, I wanted to say his flow, that's kind of touches to my last point. You're fighting inertia. people, this is a behavioral science term, or well, it's not a behavioral science term, it's a science term, but you're fighting the inertia of, if you have somebody who goes home and they stop doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's going to be harder to get them back to that level. If you're always working, your mind's always working on it, then you're going to keep moving and you're going to keep getting better.
I agree. And that's where chemistry, that's what chemistry develops into, is that flow, is that working as a single organization, a single organism, vice a bunch of different people working towards the same thing, but not necessarily with the same buy-in and the same values. So, hey, wow, this is one of those subject areas where we can get into the deep philosophical topics and follow-ons. And I didn't even go into stoicism of how to be intrinsic and extrinsic. There's a whole nother philosophy of approach in that, with Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, their philosophy, and Seneca, just their writings and stoicism and intrinsic values of the Stoic, vice the extrinsic opportunities and extrinsic motivations.
Well, I think that would be something great to continue to get into, is as far as the extrinsic and intrinsic motivations themselves. But I think even though it's very broad, this does a good job of getting into just the off-season side of how can you inspire your team, your staff, whatever situation you're working in, whatever situation you are a leader, how can you inspire your team to perform at their best ability and to get them intrinsically motivated so that they are working hard for the team. And, it's all about the team culture, I think.
Yeah, it is. And the leader is responsible. The leader is responsible for developing that culture and maintaining it, and creating a culture that the team buys into, or creating a team that buys into that culture, because you can't always have the right people on the bus. Sometimes you got to pick some other ones up and drop some people off.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
Well, hey, what'd you learn today, Cam?
Well, so I definitely learned, I enjoyed what you were talking about with the extrinsic and the intrinsic and the different aspects of the motivation. I think, going through, like you were talking about with your military experience, about thinking them as influencers. And I think that's a great analogy, really, for how it works as motivational factors for individuals.
Great. And other than the fact that the Boston Bruins had the second best front line in the league, I think I knew that, but I enjoy repeating it. The values that are created by individuals and how they buy into them, I think is such an important thing. And we're always reminded of that it's not just, run. I mean, you can have a mixed team of intrinsic and extrinsic. I'm not saying fire everybody who has extrinsic motivation on your team.
Right.
But if you want to really build everything and have that internal drive, then intrinsic is the way to go.
Right. It's all about knowing what you're dealing with when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
You wave a bunch of money in front of somebody who just wants to be the best player ever, they're not going to care, and they might not like you for it.
That's right. Oh, great. I appreciate it. And thanks for listening today, and hope you enjoyed it, and hope you found your nugget of learning in our show today.